In the thick jungles of Vietnam, where every step could be your last, and silence carried more weight than words, something unexpected happened. Amid the chaos of war, in the year 1969, a young soldier arrived at a remote U.S. military base near Da Nang. His name was Michael Reynolds. He was just 24, full of hope, and still believed that doing the right thing mattered, even in the heart of conflict. What Michael didn't expect was to find a partner who would change his life forever. Not another soldier, but a dog. Charlie wasn't just any dog. He was a highly trained war canine, bred for danger and discipline, with eyes that had already seen too much. Many avoided him, said he was too serious, too intense, but Michael saw something else, something real. Over time, they became more than a team. They became brothers. Side by side, they walked into the unknown, saving lives, watching each other's backs, and forming a bond that even time couldn't break. This is the story of loyalty that never faded, a journey of friendship forged in the fire of war and tested by the years that followed. A reminder that even in the darkest of places, the purest forms of love can survive. Welcome to the channel. If you believe these stories should never be forgotten, join us. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to help keep every memory and every voice alive. Now, without further delay, let's get straight to the point. For months, Michael and Charlie walked side by side through the thick, humid jungles of Vietnam. Each patrol was a step into the unknown, where the line between silence and danger was razor thin. Charlie, trained to detect hidden traps and explosives, became the difference between life and loss more times than anyone could count. One night, deep in the region of Quang Tri, an ambush took them by surprise. Gunfire erupted in the dark, and confusion spread like wildfire. But Charlie, always alert, caught the scent of danger just in time. His warning gave the platoon a chance to react, a chance that saved lives. 3 men walked away from that night because of him. From that moment on, no one called Charlie just a dog again. He had earned his place not just as a soldier, but as a hero. Back at base, after long days in the field, Michael would sit with Charlie by the barracks, sharing pieces of his life. He spoke of the mountains back home in Colorado, of quiet days on the farm, of his parents and his little sister Emily. Charlie would lie beside him, ears up, eyes calm, listening, always listening. In a world where many were losing themselves to fear and chaos, Charlie became Michael's anchor. He wasn't just a partner, he was family, a steady presence in a place where so much had become uncertain. It was early 1970, and the war felt heavier with each passing day. Michael Reynolds was just a few months away from returning home. The thought of his hometown in Colorado, of peace, of silence, was beginning to feel real again. But in war, nothing is certain, not even the next morning. His unit received orders for one last operation, a sweep through a dense, unpredictable region the soldiers called the Valley of Shadows. It was known for its silence and for the things that moved within it. Michael and Charlie, as always, were side by side. Charlie was tense, focused, as if he knew something wasn't right. Hours into the mission, the ground trembled beneath their boots. A sudden blast shattered the calm. The world went white, then black. Michael woke up days later in a field hospital, bruised and disoriented. Doctors told him he was lucky to be alive, but he knew better. He hadn't made it out alone. Witnesses said Charlie had dragged him across uneven ground, pulling him inch by inch to safety. No orders, no hesitation, just instinct, loyalty, and the bond they had built in silence. But Charlie was gone. Michael asked everyone, medics, officers, other handlers. No one had answers. Some said the dog had been reassigned. Others shrugged. Eventually, he was told that Charlie had likely been taken by military transport and sent to another location as part of standard procedure. Nothing more was said. No paperwork, no names, no certainty. What Michael didn't know, what no one told him, was that Charlie had been left behind, forgotten in the confusion. A loyal partner caught between the lines of bureaucracy and the fog of war. Michael carried the silence of that moment with him. Not just the silence of the jungle after the blast, but the silence that followed when he realized his closest friend was gone. not because of the war, but because of the way it ended. When Michael returned to Colorado, the world welcomed him with open arms. Family, neighbors, even strangers called him a hero. Flags waved, hands clapped, and his name was spoken with pride. But behind the smiles and warm greetings, something inside him felt unfinished. His parents did their best to lift his spirits. His younger sister, Emily, tried every day to bring some light back into his eyes, cooking his favorite meals, showing him old photo albums, reminding him of the home he once missed. But Michael wasn't whole. A part of him was still walking somewhere deep in the jungles of Vietnam. A part of him was still listening for paws on wet ground and the quiet breathing of a loyal friend by his side. He wrote letters, dozens of them, to anyone who might have answers. Government offices, military channels, organizations that worked with veterans. All he wanted to know was what happened to Charlie. But the responses, when they came, were always the same. Classified. Some reports simply labeled the dog as unrecoverable. But Michael refused to believe it. Late at night, when the world was quiet and the house finally still, he'd sit on the porch, eyes scanning the darkness like he used to on patrol. And sometimes, just before sleep pulled him under, he could swear he felt a familiar presence. The brush of fur, the warmth of breath near his hand. Medals sat on a shelf, certificates hung on a wall, but none of them filled the space left by a bond that war had interrupted, not ended. Michael didn't need recognition. He just wanted one answer, one sign that Charlie was still out there. Time moved on, as it always does. Michael left the battlefield behind and tried to build a quiet life. He became a history teacher at a small rural school, surrounded by books and chalkboards instead of jungle and gunfire. On the outside, he looked like any other man who had returned from service, but those who truly knew him could see it. The war never really left his eyes. At night, when everything grew still, his thoughts drifted to the one companion who had never let him down. Charlie, his four-legged partner, his friend. The world had moved on, but Michael's heart still held a space that only that dog could fill. Then in 2005, everything changed. Michael was now in his 50s, aging but still sharp. One afternoon, he opened his email and saw a message from an organization called War Dogs Rescue. They were dedicated to finding and helping the military dogs left behind in past conflicts. Dogs that had served, but had never come home. The message included a report from a small village in Vietnam. A local farmer claimed he had been caring for an unusual dog for many years. A dog he described as strong, loyal, and responsive only to English commands. Michael stared at the screen. His hands began to tremble. Could it really be him? After all these years? It seemed impossible. But deep inside, beyond logic and doubt, something stirred. A quiet certainty, like the echo of a voice long forgotten. "It's him," he whispered. "It has to be." More than 30 years had passed since Michael Reynolds left the jungles of Vietnam behind. The war was long over, but some things never truly ended, especially the ones we carry in the heart. By then, Michael was no longer the young soldier he once was. His hair had turned silver, his steps were slower, and his body carried the quiet aches of time. Yet when he heard that Charlie might still be alive, he didn't think twice. With the support of a group dedicated to reuniting war dogs with their former handlers, he boarded a plane and returned to the very land where he had once faced the unimaginable. The village of Phu Yen welcomed him with warmth and quiet respect. The family that had cared for Charlie led him through narrow paths lined with bamboo and old memories, until they reached a sunlit courtyard of packed earth. There, lying under the shade of a tree, was a dog, age thin, his coat a soft blend of grays and browns. He barely moved, as if resting from a lifetime of waiting. Michael stood still. For a moment, he wondered if this was truly his old friend. But then, the dog's ears perked up. Slowly, cautiously, he lifted his head. His eyes, clouded by the years, seemed to clear just enough to see what the heart already knew. Charlie rose to his feet, unsteady, trembling, but determined. He sniffed the air, recognizing something buried deep in memory. And then, without hesitation, he moved, stumbling at first, then trotting faster, until he collapsed into Michael's arms. The old soldier fell to his knees, holding him close. Neither of them made a sound at first, but then Charlie began to whimper softly, as if releasing decades of silence, and Michael cried in a way he hadn't since the war. Time had passed, so much had changed, but in that moment, it was as if no time had passed at all. With the help of a rescue organization and support from the embassy, Michael finally brought Charlie back home. Not just home to the United States, but home to a quiet little house nestled in the outskirts of Boulder, Colorado. It wasn't a grand place, but it was peaceful, and after all they'd been through, that was more than enough. Charlie quickly adapted to his new life. He had a warm bed, his favorite treats, and the affection of a neighborhood that quickly fell in love with him. Kids would stop by the gate just to wave at the soldier dog, and Charlie, even in his old age, would wag his tail proudly as if he knew exactly what those words meant. For Michael, the war had once been a wound that never closed, but now with Charlie by his side again, the past didn't feel as heavy. He began writing, not to relive the pain, but to heal from it. Each page was filled not just with memories, but with moments of gratitude. Gratitude for a friend who had never truly left him. Charlie was older now, slower. His steps weren't as quick, and his eyes had grown cloudy with time. But on sunny mornings, he still chased sticks across the backyard like the pup he once was. And every day, as Michael poured his coffee and looked out the window, he'd smile and whisper the same words. "We're still together, buddy, and that's all that matters." The years slipped by faster than anyone expected. Charlie, once full of energy and purpose, began to slow down. His steps grew heavier, his legs a little less steady. The spark in his eyes, once sharp and alert, started to fade. But the loyalty never did. Every morning, Michael would sit on the front porch, wrapped in a blanket, holding a warm cup of tea. Without fail, Charlie would make his way over, gently curling up beside him, resting his head near Michael's feet, just like he had always done, through every chapter of their lives. Seasons came and went, and the bond between them only grew deeper. It wasn't built on words, but on shared silences, on trust that needed no explanation. One quiet afternoon in the fall, with golden leaves drifting gently from the trees and the sun casting a soft glow across the yard, Charlie lay beside Michael one last time. There was no struggle, no sound, just peace. Michael reached down, placed a hand on Charlie's head, and whispered with a trembling voice, "You stayed until the very end. Thank you, my friend." In the backyard, beneath the old tree where they once played, Michael laid Charlie to rest. There was no grand ceremony, just a simple wooden marker with 2 words carved carefully by hand: soldier, brother. A tribute to a bond that time, distance, and even war could never break. Time passed, but some memories refused to fade. With the years behind him and the weight of silence finally lifting, Michael Reynolds sat down to write. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He simply wanted the world to know about the friend who had stood by him when everything else fell apart. The result was a book titled The Last Bark. But it wasn't just about battles or uniforms. It was about trust, about a bond between a man and a dog that went beyond commands and missions. Michael wrote not with anger, but with tenderness, sharing how loyalty doesn't need a voice to be heard. The book quietly found its way into the hands of veterans, teachers, and young soldiers who had never heard of the 4-legged warriors that walked beside men in war. Letters began arriving. People thanked him for telling the kind of story that rarely made headlines. In time, The Last Bark became more than a memoir. It became a reminder that behind every mission, there are moments of compassion worth remembering. Schools added it to their reading lists to teach about empathy and healing. Museums reached out. A documentary was made. And at the heart of it all was Charlie, the dog who never gave up, who never forgot, and who became a symbol of a generation of silent heroes. His story now lives on, not just in pages, but in hearts. Michael Reynolds lived a long life, but he never let go of the memories that shaped him, especially the ones tied to his most loyal friend. Even as his steps slowed and his hair turned gray, he made time to visit the quiet corner of his yard, where a simple wooden marker rested beneath a tall tree. That was where Charlie lay, not just a dog, but a partner, a quiet guardian through the storm. In interviews, Michael often said, "He wasn't just trained to protect me. He gave me strength when I had none left." Before he passed, Michael asked that his ashes be spread beside Charlie's resting place, so they could be together once more, as they were in the beginning. And that's exactly what happened. Now in that peaceful yard in Colorado, as the sun dips below the hills and the wind brushes through the leaves, something lingers in the air. If you listen closely, you might still hear a gentle bark in the distance, a whisper of loyalty, a reminder that some friendships never fade. These aren't just war stories, they are human stories. Stories of trust, sacrifice, and love that defies the limits of time and language. And now we pass this story on to you. What about you? Have you ever heard this story before? What would you have done in Michael's place? What other untold stories of soldiers and their companions deserve to be remembered? Use this moment. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. If this story touched your heart, don't let it be forgotten. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to help keep memories like these alive.